I had somebody ask me about this piece that came with some of the Ronin Warriors figures. As a lot of y'all collectors know, the Playmates version that was released around 1995 did not come with this little mount that you could attach the armor to. But to do a little backup, before the Playmates versions were released in 1995 in the United States, it was several versions that were released internationally that were released internationally in the 80s. I believe it was some released in Spain. I believe it was some released in, might have been some released in Mexico, but they were definitely released in Japan, of course. And they were definitely released in Italy. And getting back to the little mount, the little stand right here. I want to say it was only in Japan and only in Italy that you could find these mounts. And I know for a fact that it might have only been with the Talpa figure and it might have only been with the Wildfire figure that you could get this mount, specifically in Japan and Italy. I don't know why that was. I don't know why that was the case. But this right here is the Japanese version of the Wildfire figure, and it came with this mount. So most of us collectors are already familiar with the Ronin Warriors that were released by Playmates in 1995. And as you can see, that's the collection that I got right there. In addition to the Bandai Armor Plus figures that they released a couple years ago too. But most of us only collected the ones that were made by Playmates because those are the ones that we're familiar with. But they did, as I said, make some earlier Ronin Warriors figures, your Ronin Samurai Troopers, as it's called by its proper title in Japan, earlier in the 80s. And I have several versions of those. I don't have like the whole collection, but for example, that's the one that I have of Segmet, or as he's known in Japan as Nedza. I got one for Kento, or as he's known in Japan as Shu. And of course, I got the one for Wildfire, which was the only way that I could get this stand. Now, at one point in time, before I had even discovered that these existed, I had actually planned on making my own kind of stands. Like what I did, I had took some extra Ronin Warriors figures that I had, and I had basically separated all the parts and dismantled them and painted the exposed parts so that the armor could basically snap onto those. But I decided that I wouldn't even have to go through this whole process of making my own stands when I found out that they actually had these available. And they were compatible too, despite the fact that a lot of the older figures from the 80s had like different shapes and they had like a different style from the Playmates figures. Surprisingly, the armor was still compatible with a lot of the 80s figures. Now this right here is the Wildfire figure that they did from the 80s. And as you can see, they were made a little bit differently than the Playmates version. The Playmates version that they did in the 90s, and you can see like the whole head sculpt is different and everything too. The Playmates version that they did in the 90s were made out of plastic, whereas the original ones that they did in Japan were made entirely out of metal. Like they even had metal hands. But strangely enough, the armor still ended up being compatible. So even if you are like somehow able to stumble across some of the old ones from the 80s, you'll find that the plastic armor or the rubber armor that they had from the 1995 figures made by Playmates will actually snap on to these. It's still compatible. Like I say, the figures are just shaped a little bit differently and molded a little bit differently, but armor is still compatible. It'll still snap on. Also got another comparison to do. This is what the Japanese version of Segmet looked like right here, and that's just the American version. So yeah, as you can see, the American versions versus the Japanese versions of the figures were obviously different. Sorry about the top of my figure case. It's a little bit dusty, as y'all can see. But yeah, that's basically it. I just kind of wanted to go over the sort of odd history of this little figure stand. You can't really find them anywhere. If you do, you're really going to have to do like a lot of searching. But if anybody does want to get their hands on one, you are most likely going to end up having to get like a Japanese version or an Italian version. So just sort of hit the internet, do some searching around and look for it. If you can find it, I give you props. But like I say, difficult to find. Strangely enough, I couldn't even get this actual piece that I have in one order. I had to get this piece from different places. The arms and the legs I had to order from like an Italian seller, and the actual stand, the chair part, I had to get that from seller in Japan. So even this one piece that I have didn't even come from the same place. So again, these are really difficult to find, and if you can get your hands on one, I salute you. But y'all had questions about where these came from, so I just wanted to get back to y'all and respond to that.